Have you guys heard of this story before? Yeah. Yeah, Bennett. We have. Me too. Me too. I always thought it was funny. This is we have a couple kids' Bibles for me because I don't read well, the big ones. But we have a couple kids' Bibles, and this is usually one of the stories in the kids' Bibles. And that's weird because the whole basis is they're going to throw someone into a den of lions to kill them. Like, that's a brutal children. So that's how I talk to my kids now. So I threaten to throw them in lions' den or burning fires or drown them. Okay, this is getting weirder, huh? I'm going to figure this thing out one day. Woo! Hang on. What up? Hey. Hey. I think I know. It's this button. All right. Are you at Daniel chapter 6 yet? All right. All right. Before we start this, I need your help. All right. I need you to do something for me, and I'm going to do something for you. All right. I want to take this time, this next 30 seconds, this next minute, and I want to get rid of all distractions. So many times in my life, whether it be school or church, I might have been presented with the right information to make good decisions and better decisions for my life, yet I was distracted by things and I didn't catch it. Not all distractions are bad. Some are good distractions. My kids are one of them, right? Right? Cute kids, still a distraction, right? Facebook's cool. Is Tom Brady going to be a Patriot? I don't know. Cool distraction, but still a distraction. So I'm asking you, whatever that means for you today, change something, put the phone away, whatever it is, let's limit our distractions. Me too, Bennett. I was told last time I talked or preached, or if I talked during music, do you guys know what I do? Diane Gibson knows what I do. What do? I twirl my mustache, and it's creepy, and it's a distraction. So how can I expect you to limit your distractions if I don't limit my distractions? And I'm going to need help doing that. Samantha, come help me. Samantha, hurry up. Come help me. This is weird. What'd you guys do on church? Well, Sam cut off Bennett's mustache. Just part of it, though. The whole mustache isn't a distraction, just the edges, right? All right. You have 30 seconds.
What am I doing?
Just cut the long parts off.
Do I do it at an angle?
Ow! I'm just joking. Go. Is it enough? Don't say more. Well, I don't want it back. Don't feed it to me. How is it? Good enough? I won't twist it. Get out of here. I had to have Sam do it because I didn't want my ponytail cut. I knew if I would ask someone else, like, well, we got the scissors here. I don't twirl my ponytail in front of you guys. I do it at home. All right. Now that we're weird, how do I look? For real? Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's get to the Bible stuff. All right. So here's the backstory. So if you turn back, you don't have to turn back if you don't trust me. I'm going to turn back and read something from Daniel 1, and it's going to be verse 3 through 5. And then I'm going to lead you up to where we're at in the book of Daniel. So Daniel chapter 1, verses 3. So we're going to start there. It says, the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from the nobility, young men without any physical defect, good-looking, suitable for instruction in all wisdom, knowledgeable, perceptive, and capable of serving in the king's palace. He was to teach them their language, the literature. The king assigned them daily provisions from the royal food and from the wine that he drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to attend to the king. All right, so Babylon is one side. Jerusalem is another side. Okay, Babylon came over and just took over. Right, they took over. And when they took over, they had this cool idea. I think it's a cool idea. And they're like, we don't only want to conquer you, which they did. They took possession, and they had enslaved, like they were the rulers now of Jerusalem or this time frame. So like the Israelites, God's chosen people, were technically captive, right? So what they did is, in order so we don't keep having these people rise up and want to come back and try to kill us or rise up and want to take back what was rightfully theirs, why don't we take some of the good-looking ones, the smart ones, right? Maybe some that were in the royal family that would have a lot or would be smart enough to come up with a plan to get back at us. Why don't we take them and we'll make them our own? We'll teach them our ways. We'll serve them right. They can live in the palace. We'll feed them good food, right? So that in effort to help limit retaliation, we'd have some of the ones that people would look up to. We get them to learn our ways. Now they're part of us. We don't have to worry about it, right? It's a cool idea. Daniel was one of these people, right? Daniel was one of these people that came back or that were selected. Think of him like me, good looking, knowledgeable, perceptive, full of it, modest. Thank you. Right, super modest, humble, had a mustache. Right, so that's where we are now. So Daniel had came by, he learned the ways, he had received favor of a few different kings, right? He was able to do some things that other people couldn't. And then that leads us to chapter 6. So chapter 6, verse 1. It says, Darius decided to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, stationed throughout the realm, and over the 3 administrators, including Daniel. Now, the satrap, think of like, Red says a marshal. Think of like city government. Right, so there's a hierarchy, there's a chain of command. So we have a mayor over the city of Kewanee, and then we have councilmen, and then over that even higher we would have a governor of Illinois, and over that we'd have legislative senate, like federal court or federal, then we go vice president, president. So it's a chain of command. This is the same thing that's going on here. There's a chain of command. So these satraps would have been government officials. So they would have some power, right? And so these satraps would be accountable to them so that the king would not be defrauded. Daniel distinguished himself above the administrators and satraps because he had an extraordinary spirit. So the king planned to set him over the whole realm. So now think of him as being second in command. The plan was Daniel had done such a good job at every position he had worked for so far, he was going to now be in charge of all this government, and the king could be in charge of him still, but he was going to run it. He was going to run this stuff. So that's where he's doing. I find it cool. I find it unique that Daniel, who was taken captive, it says, had a remarkable spirit, distinguished himself above, because an extraordinary spirit. Daniel was held captive. Daniel was taken over. Daniel didn't get a choice in what he did, but he still had a good work ethic. People from the outside who didn't believe the same as Daniel, that were technically his captors, they still could see through Daniel that, man, this guy's a worker. Man, this guy has an extraordinary spirit. He tries. He puts forth his best effort, even though he's technically our captive. Daniel disagreed with a lot of the religious beliefs, all the religious beliefs of his boss. Does anyone here work for someone that might have a different belief system than you do? No, okay. I do, right? So I find it unique because now I'm interested. Now I'm trying to see, okay, he thinks different than me. I'm under somebody. I can still work hard, and he still was accountable to him, right? He was receptive of the king's ways. He would still do what he was asked, even though there was a different belief system. I think we can learn something from Daniel. So that's Daniel's position. Now there now becomes the plot against Daniel. If you read with me verse 4. So verse 4 says, the administrators and satraps therefore kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom. But they could find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Then these men said, we will never find any charges against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the laws of his God. Let's pause. These people that were Daniel was going to be placed in charge of some of the other administrators, right? All of the other administrators. And they're looking, they're like, man, I don't like that. Let's look into Daniel. Let's see if we can find some fault in Daniel. And they couldn't. They started looking at him and watching the way he worked and watching the way he lived. And they're trying to check something out. Man, he does everything correct. He's good at what he does. He's honest. He's trustworthy. That's who this Daniel character is. I want to be such a way that when people want to find fault in me, they can't find fault in me. I'm not. I'm not that way yet. Give me time. But these people who had something against Daniel and they wanted to gain something by finding fault in him couldn't even find a fault in Daniel, even though it would give them gain. You ever heard the phrase, live in such a way that if someone accuses you, no one will believe it? Live above reproach. You ever heard that? My dad used to holler that at me sometimes. He used to holler at me a lot, right? But Bennett, live in such a way that if someone even accuses you of doing something wrong, everyone else would be like, there's no way Bennett would do that. Not Bennett. That's what they're doing here, not Daniel. And they're looking, like we can't even make something up because he's so trustworthy. The only way we're going to get Daniel is if we can trip him up, find something against him concerning the law of his God. So Daniel was faithful. So verse 6. So the administrators and satraps went together to the king and said to him, may King Darius live forever. All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, advisors, and governors had agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days anyone who petitions any god or man except you, or prays to any god or man except for you, the king would be thrown into the lion's den. So if anyone prays or worships any other god or human outside of you, king, you should make this law, put it into a law that if that happens, they get thrown into the lion's den. And this is verse 8. Therefore, your majesty, establish this and sign your documents so that as a law of the Medes and the Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed. So King Darius signed the written edict. So they're like, all right, we can't get Daniel, he's too trustworthy. We can't get Daniel, he's too honest. Even if we made something up about him, no one would believe it. Because look at him, he's good. He's good. But there is something I think we can get. He's so faithful and so good at his work, but he's even more faithful and more trustworthy and more dedicated to his God. So if we want to trip him up, we got to create something that would have to cause Daniel to choose between the king or God. So they did. So they went to the king and were like, hey, king, your majesty, you're the man. You've been lifting. You look good. You look good, king. So good. We had this great idea. You should make a law. You should make a law, and it says this. There's too many other people getting prayed to and worshiped and honored besides you. Let's do a 30-day King Darius stint. Only King Darius. Nothing else. King's like, I am pretty great. I have been lifting a little bit. Been watching Riley on TikTok, so I'm coming around to it. Yeah. So they're like, all right, let's do it. They're like, and you have to sign it into a law. So that, based off of what we know, the Persians and the Medes, that if it can't be changed no matter what. So for 30 days, you're going to be the guy, the only guy. He's like, deal. Y'all convinced me. So he signs it. All right? And then here comes Daniel. Right? So this is verse 10. Verse 10 says, when Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house, the window in its upstairs room opened towards Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning, praying, and imploring to his God. The law had changed. The circumstances had changed. The consequences had changed, but Daniel didn't. Do you hear me? Even though the ways of the world changed around Daniel, he knew it. It didn't that he didn't know. It wasn't that he didn't know. It wasn't that, he didn't check Facebook and didn't find out about it yet. It wasn't that. He had heard the document had been signed. He knew what the consequences were, but Daniel's faith did not change. Daniel's prayer life did not change. The ways of the world, the laws of the world, did not affect the prayers or the ways of God in Daniel's heart and in his mind. Can you say the same? The world's pretty crazy sometimes, right? Constantly laws are coming out or things are changing. We're like, ooh, I don't know about that. Ooh, that's pretty wild. I don't know about that. And there's a few different types of people. There's the people that when things change, they slightly change their viewpoint. And they just bounce back and forth, like toss on the waves, back and forth. I'm on this side, and I'm on this side. Or are you the kind of person that no matter what the consequences, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the laws or the change in the ways of the world say, your faith's going to remain the same? Your prayer life's going to remain the same. You're still going to honor and worship God the same no matter what the outside says. That's what I like about Daniel. And it wasn't even so much that he was like out on the streets petitioning, this law is unfair. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It wasn't that he got all his buddies, man, we got to make a stand today. Not that I'm saying anything's wrong with that. He was just like, I heard it. I know it. It's not going to change me. How can I, after knowing what God's done for me, turn my back on God? How can you, after knowing and seeing what God has done in your life and the lives of those around us, how can we then change our opinion on God and who he is because of a law that was made? If we're connected and if we're in a personal relationship with Jesus and we're in the scriptures and we know it and we live it, man, we should not change. We should not change. Let's continue. Now the prosecution of Daniel. So let's look at verse 12. So this is talking about the satraps and administrators that came and saw Daniel praying. So they approached the king and asked about his edict. Didn't you sign that for 30 days and any person who petitions or prays to any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, as a law of the Medes and the Persians, the order stands. It is irrevocable. It's not changed. Yeah, it hasn't changed. I did it already. Then they replied to the king, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day. As soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased. He set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. Then these men went together to the king and said to him, you know, your majesty, that it is law of the Medes and the Persians that no edict or ordinance the king established can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and of his nobles, and nothing in regards to Daniel could be changed. So we can find out a few things about the king and Daniel's relationship from that little section. So these guys, the administrators, the governors, they didn't want Daniel to be appointed over them. We know that. We know the law was signed. They had kind of tricked the king into it. The king's not completely guilty or innocent, but they tricked him into doing this because they didn't want it to really glorify the king. They wanted it to get Daniel, right? So they go and they see it. They come to the king. Hey, king, you remember you did that thing, right? He's like, yep. You remember that law and it can't be changed? Yeah, I did it. It's irrevocable. Well, Daniel, you know Daniel, one of the exiles. He's not one of our own. He still prays. And it says the king was upset. He was troubled. In that moment, the king knew, something he did was going to negatively affect Daniel. And he thought highly of Daniel because he saw Daniel's trustworthiness. He saw Daniel's work ethic. He saw Daniel day in and day out so much that he was going to put him in charge of everyone else. He was favored. He looked at Daniel and saw favor. And then now he's worried. He was like, I spent the next while or the next day or the next afternoon trying to figure out how to get Daniel off the hook. And there was no way. And so the governors, satraps, the group of people that wanted to persecute and catch Daniel, they came back, king, hey, you remember, right? It can't be changed. You said that. He's like, I know. They'll bring him here. And they threw him in the lion's den. They put the seal on it. He stamped his approval. And then he left. I like what he says. The second part of verse 17. I lied. I don't like what it said there. 16. Yeah, thank you. 16. So the king gave an order, and they brought Daniel through in the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. This king didn't serve the same God as Daniel. may your God, who you continually serve, rescue you. Like, I'm sorry, man, I couldn't do anything. It's up to your God now. When you serve God, when you walk with God, people around you notice, or they should notice, even if they don't believe the same way as you. Do you agree? Okay, I agree as well. That's why I said it. All right. Now, have you ever been reminded of someone who's not a Christian that you should trust in your God? I have. We talked about Abel earlier. When we had Abel, we didn't know he had Down syndrome. And then so he was born, he had Down syndrome, and then he was in the NICU for a while. He had some other problems. And the amount of people, it was funny. I think they were trying to be nice. And it was, if it's one of you, it wasn't anyone in here. All right. I had probably 6 or 7 different couples or people be like, hey, you two, you and Sam are fit for the job. Like, at least, hey, it couldn't happen to a better couple. And they're like, what? Like, what's that? And so I asked, like, well, thank you. What do you mean? He's like, well, you have your faith. At least you have your faith. And the one who I remember having a conversation with, he was not a believer or a professed believer. I didn't know him to go to church, but he knew I went to church. He's like, at least you have your faith. Like, I'm glad it happened to you because you have your faith. Whatever happens, you have God. And at first I was like, well, you're right, I do. Thank you. It was a good reminder. But then I was kind of happy. Now, they might just lump me in with Sam, right? At least you have Sam and her faith, right? But even people who don't believe the same way as you can recognize and see power, see honor, can see advantage in believing in a God of miracles. And it's the same way the king did here. Even though he didn't believe the same way, he's like, hey, may the God who you continually serve rescue you. It's up to you now. It's up to you now. So this is the good part. I always say in stories like this, especially a lot of Old Testament stories where God shows up and prevails, that even if the story ended there, like if we didn't get to verse 18, it would still be a good story. It would still be a story worth reading and recognizing that Daniel, knowing full well what would happen to him, still chose his God over his own safety. Because in that moment, whether we know it or not, Daniel was choosing his faith in God, and he realized that there was something greater than this life on this earth. He knew it wasn't the end. It may be the end for me physically on this earth, this life, but there's more. He knew it. He knew it. Sometimes I used to get, not depressed, let down when I'd pray for something, and there was like, man, we need the miracle, and then the miracle doesn't happen. I'm like, oh, but it happened to Daniel. It happened to David and Goliath. Happened to Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Happened to Jonah. Like all these things, I just go through my stories in my head. Happened to them. Like, where's that miraculous comeback? We don't need the miraculous comeback because when we want the miraculous comeback, sometimes me, I'll speak for myself, we get so focused on our right now that we forget that there's an eternity in heaven that we get a miraculous comeback with. We forget the power that Jesus did on the cross. We forget the eternity with God. Right? And we think, man, death is the end for us. It's not. When you have your trust and your faith in Jesus, it's not the end for you. Let's read verse 18. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. Diversions were brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, the king says, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke with the king. May the king live forever. Man, pause. The first words out of his mouth from the one who put him in the den of lions was, may the king live forever. Not Bennett's words. I would have been super quiet. Like, come and get me. You know, come down and check it out. Right? It speaks to his character, right? 22 says, my God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they haven't harmed me. For I was found innocent before him and also before you, your majesty. I have not done harm. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. Okay, pause right there. Don't read on yet. Don't read on. Look at me. Look at my trimmed mustache. Look at me. Take it the rest of the way off. So he gets out, right? He would say, "Did your God save you? May the king live forever." Weird, right? But he gets him out and it's cool. He's like, "All right, you're unharmed." He's like, "Yeah, angel shut the lion's mouth. I was unharmed because I'm innocent. I didn't do anything wrong. I've served you well. I've been honest and trustworthy with you, right, king?" And he's like, "Yeah, you're great." Here's something about the Old Testament. Some of the New Testament too, but the Old Testament. It gets dark. It's brutal. I remember having conversations. I still have conversations with people. And so our small group, either last week or a couple weeks ago, we were talking about how the world's worse off now than it was before. And they may be correct in certain ways, but bear with me on the next couple verses. It gets crazy. Right? It gets crazy. So this is verse 24. The king then gave the command, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den. They, their children, and their wives. Talk about overboard. They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. So, you know what? This is the Bible. I just want to read just that part. Yeah. Hungry lion. Well, yeah, they had to go a night without snacks. Right? So, the king avenged Daniel in his own way. The king avenged himself. He had been tricked. He had been duped. So there was punishment for those that were a part of it and their families. That's wild. I don't want to be distracted by just that point and get off topic, but it wasn't that Daniel's faith suddenly made everyone around him a great follower of God. It wasn't that happened. But let's keep reading. This is verse 25. Then the king Darius wrote to those of every people, nation, and language who live on the whole earth, "May your prosperity abound. Issue a decree that in all my royal dominion, people must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel." He put some respect on God's name, the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. His dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. For he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel took a stand knowing the consequences could be lethal. He was protected by his God. And because of that, people heard that there is a true God, a living God. And it wasn't even from Daniel. Right? When we make a stand for God, when you do it in your life, people will notice and people will hear what you've done. They will know the reason behind what you've done. Right? Whether you succeed or whether you fail in our eyes, in the world's eyes, makes no difference. When you make a stand for Jesus, when you make a stand for God, people notice. Let me leave you with this. Does the effort you put forth at work or school give God glory? Daniel's did. Does the effort you put forth at work give God glory? If people were to look at you and how you live and how you work, would they be like, "Man, he's above reproach"? Are you above reproach? Can people, if they said something, if someone told me a lie about you, would I automatically think, there's no way. Not them. Do you remain faithful to God as your situations change? As the world around you changes, up and down, good and bad, for you, against you, do you remain faithful to God? Does your prayer life remain the same? Does your servant life remain the same? Does the way you talk and honor those around you and God remain the same? Does your life lead others to see value in being a Christian? Do people look at you and how you live your life and be like, "Man, there's some value to following God. There's something about it. At least they have that." If I was in their situation, I would be lost, but they have God. They have faith. Do they see value in your life being a Christian? And are you willing to take a stand for God despite the consequences? I hope none of us have to make a choice where we, depending on what we choose, could get thrown into a lion's den. It'd be really exciting for like the first second, right? But I hope that's not a common thing we have. Common consequences that we face for taking stand for Jesus could be mocked, could be slowed down, hindered our work progression, could lose some friends, be looked at as weird. Some people might not want to invite you to things or hang out with you to things. They might feel uncomfortable around you just for not knowing the difference. But are you willing to take a stand for God despite the consequences? Let's pray. Father, we are thankful that we have stories in the Old Testament and New Testament that can encourage us and lead us to better ways to live our life. We are thankful that you are faithful no matter what the circumstance is. No matter what the circumstance is. I'm asking you to encourage everyone here to be willing to take a stand for you. I'm asking you to encourage everyone here to work hard and be trustworthy, a work ethic that would give you glory. I'm asking you to live our lives in such a way, to give us courage to live our lives in such a way that when people see us, they see value in following you. And they can't do that unless we're following you. Unless we walk around with this peace and joy that only you can give. Encourage us this week. Help us remind us of this week, that we serve a living God, a God of miracles, a God of wonders, a God that is true and reigning. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen.